אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו מצויים בעיצומה של מלחמה קיומית מול ציר הרשע של איראן. התנאי הראשון לניצחון במלחמה הקיומית הזאת
on this or in this existential war is unity among us. We must stand united as one, facing a vicious and brutal enemy that wishes to eradicate and kill all of us without exception, right and left, religious and secular, Jews and non-Jews. We've discovered this not just on October 7th. This is something that we've discovered throughout the war, but even more so, we've discovered it in the terrible massacre, in the cold-blooded execution of 6 of our hostages, Carmel Gat, Eden Yerushalmi, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Sasha Lubanov, Almog Sarusi, and First Staff Sergeant Ori Danino. May God avenge their death. Over the past day, I've spoken on the phone with several of their family members, and while we were talking, I was looking at the pictures, the images of these pure souls, and my heart, the heart of this entire nation, was shattered to pieces. You can see the light that they emanate. You see the hope, the nobility. You hear their amazing life stories. And all this light got put out at once. All this purity got cut off by the brutal hand of monsters. I said to the families, and I reiterate this evening, I am asking for your forgiveness that we did not manage to bring them back still alive. We were close, but we didn't achieve it. And I would also like to once again repeat this evening, Israel will not stand silently, doing nothing, facing this massacre. Hamas will pay a very heavy price for that in the war against the axis of evil. And in this specific war against Hamas, and also in the north, we have set 4 goals: to eradicate Hamas, to bring back all of our hostages, to make sure that Gaza no longer poses a threat over Israel, and to allow the people of Israel living in the north return home safely. 3 of these goals go through one place, and that is the Philadelphi corridor. It is the conduit of oxygen and armament for Hamas. And I would like to devote several minutes in order to explain the meaning of the Philadelphi corridor. What is it? What is its significance for Israel's security? What is its significance and importance in guaranteeing that we won't face another October 7th and another October 7th and another October 7th, just as Hamas promised that it would do? So first of all, I'd like to show you what we had over the years until we pulled out of there. This is the state of Israel. This is Egypt, and you can see the Gaza Strip here. The distance from Tel Aviv isn't that big, from Beersheba and from the area surrounding the border. Of course, there's hardly any distance, but we had an international border going from the sea all the way down to Eilat. This was Israel's international border. If you could blow it up a bit. So if we see this now, as we zoom in, you can see that throughout these borders, the maritime border is under our control, but the the ground border isn't under our control. Ashkelon, Sderot, the Kibbutzim, the Kerem Shalom passage, and here you have the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor, all of them under our control. And this is what happened when we pulled out of Gaza. This is what happened. The borders remained in our hands. They tried breaking through the maritime border, remember the Marmara and some other events in flotillas, but we weathered them all. So nothing could come wherever we were in control of the borders. But once we pulled out of the Philadelphia corridor. See, this is the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. And once we pulled out of there was no obstacle left from a massive infusion of weapons and means of warfare and machines for manufacturing weapons and machines for digging tunnels, all of that under the auspices of Iran, with the funding of Iran. So all of these things that you see here came into Gaza. So Gaza became this huge threat over Israel because there was no barrier here. There was nothing stopping this. This is what happened. So now the question remains, and people ask me this question. Well, if it was that bad, right? How come you didn't conquer it? Why didn't you conquer it? And the answer is that we constantly tried to harm, to attack, of course, immediately after the disengagement, this armament, and of course, even more so under the time when Morsi was in regime and power, but also with Mubarak as well. But we fought them. There were a series of wars or campaigns. I led 3 of these campaigns: Pillar of Defense, Guardian of the Walls, and Protective Edge. We fought it. And this, of course, led to a situation in which we killed off thousands of terrorists and senior ranking commanders, the chief of general staff of Hamas, Jabri, but there wasn't national or international legitimacy to go inside of Gaza, to conquer it, to reconquer the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor. There wasn't any national consensus or international agreement to that. Now, the importance of the Philadelphia corridor, it's not something I'm just saying now. I already said that 20 years ago. Sharon declared the disengagement at the end of 2003, and then a few months later, on March 26, 2004, I described what are my minimal demands, and I said my first condition is control over all the crossings into the Gaza Strip and from it, from the land, from the air, and from the sea. The Philadelphia corridor, which separates between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, will not be evacuated. If Israel cedes control over it, that's what I said back then Gaza will turn into a terrorist enclave. And when I resigned from the government, when I realized that they were going for the disengagement, that they were going to uproot Jewish settlements, communities, I handed in my resignation later, and I said to Prime Minister Sharon at the time, I said, as a minimum, I demanded that we keep the Philadelphia corridor in our hands. So it's not something new. It was obvious that if we don't have this corridor, they will arm themselves, they will create a monster. The axis of evil needs the Philadelphia corridor, and for the same reason, we must have control over the Philadelphia corridor. Hamas insists for exactly this reason that we won't be there, and it's exactly for this reason that I insist that we do stay there. The presence in the Philadelphia corridor is, first of all, a political strategic issue. We must fixate the fact that we're there. And people say to me, okay, so we pull out. What's the big deal? We'll pull out for 42 days and then we'll come back. And I said, okay, yeah, I've heard that once before. That's what people said when we pulled out of Lebanon. They said with the first rocket, with the first missile, we will re-enter and conquer this territory. And we will have vast, massive international support from that. Well, thousands of missiles have been launched from Lebanon, and there was no international support for that. And then when we pulled out of the Gaza Strip, when we just did this now, they said, what's the problem? With the first rocket, we'll go in. Well, the first rocket that is smuggled built either beneath the ground or launched from above the ground will go in. Well, 20 years had passed and we didn't go in. So all these people who say that it's not such a problem to go in, well, there is a problem. Definitely, big time. It's not easy to do that. And it's not just a military tactical question, it's a question of a tremendous diplomatic international pressure exerted by the whole world. If we pull out, then there will be pressure not to go back in, not to return. And I'm telling you how difficult it was for us to overcome the international pressure. I weathered that pressure to go into Rafah. And look at the price we paid. There was massive pressure. The ICC, they brought it up a day or two before the decision. They knew we were about to decide that there was a weapons embargo that is continuing to spread. We paid with the lives of our soldiers. But that is nothing in comparison to what we will be targeted with if we pull out. And everybody understands the importance of this, but they don't support us. They want us to end the war. This is what they all want us to do, to end the war. And this corridor is different from all other places, from all other corridors. It is central. It will determine our entire future. It has tremendous importance for us. But the world that wants to see the war come to an end, that's the last thing in the world that they want us to do, to go in there, and there will be tremendous pressure exerted us in the Security Council, and I'm not going to specify other things because I don't want to give anybody ideas. Why? Why should we walk into this trap? So they say that it's possible. Well, I say that this will not bring back the hostages. On the contrary, I would like to tell you that when we entered Philadelphia, it was only then that we started feeling a change. For long months after the first hostage deal, Hamas wouldn't budge. They kept insisting you have to declare in advance about the end of the war, you have to commit to pull out of the Gaza Strip, and what that actually meant was that they could go back to be in control of Gaza. And the first crack, and of course this doesn't lead to any deal or the release of any hostages, and the first crack appeared once we entered Rafah and took over the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah crossing, because that's their oxygen tubes. So and then things started to change. Then they kind of withdrew when they thought that perhaps Iran would come to their rescue or Hezbollah, and now they're hoping that international pressure or domestic pressure would save them. But the fact is that the first effective change we saw towards a deal, what made a deal possible, was once we seized the Philadelphia corridor. And when you leave it, you walk out and you don't come back. I've already said that we're not pulling out for 42 days, but because we're going to stay there for 42 years. That's how I was quoted. It's not what I said, but I know that if we leave, we probably won't be able to return for 42 years. So we left and we couldn't return for 20 years. And after we sacrificed and fought, and now we have them by their necks. We caught them by their throats, and this could bring back the hostages. And that also, by the way, prevents smuggling hostages above the ground. They could tell that they could take them during these 42 days and take them into Sinai. It's just a few meters from there to smuggle them. They cross the border and that's it. They disappear. They could all of a sudden pop up in Iran or Yemen. Absolutely not. So after we managed to get all that, we're not going to forgo this. We're not going to step into this terrible trap, which is not a military tactical question. It's a diplomatic strategic issue. And just some of the security elements in Israel said we can pull out of the Gaza Strip and no problem. We can pull out of Lebanon and we will return immediately. I think that after October 7th, we've learned to be a bit more cautious in our assessments and to take into account all of the elements of the picture. Now, regretfully, even though we are fully committed, and I am fully committed to a deal, to advance a hostage deal, unfortunately, we haven't seen any similar response from Hamas. We have agreed to the outline presented by President Biden on May 31st. We agreed to what they called or referred to as the final bridging proposal on August 16th. We agreed to all of that, but Hamas refused to the first one, and then they refused to the second one. The representative Al-Khia, he said yesterday, withdrawal from the entire Gaza Strip and end to the war. Leave us in government. That's their position. They haven't budged. Like I said, they budged a little bit, but once they think that they identify a certain weakness on our side, or maybe if there is some pressure that could break us, they immediately bounce back. So this is why we're not going to pull out. The importance of the Philadelphia corridor is cardinal. It's crucial for bringing back the hostages and to also ensure that Hamas is crushed and that Gaza will not resume to being a threat on Israel. So this is why we've made it clear that this is our position. But from amongst us, we started hearing voices from inside the cabinet, ministers in the government. And they said, no problem. We can pull out, even though we've already decided not to pull out. So this is why I had to bring it officially to the cabinet for a vote and to anchor this and to make it clear that there are certain things we won't compromise on. I want to clarify, I'm flexible. I'm flexible wherever I can be flexible. I do not insist where I can show flexibility, but I'm also not flexible on these places where I must insist. And this is something we must all insist on. Otherwise, we'll once again have a terrible disaster like what happened. The axis of evil needs the Philadelphia corridor, the Philadelphia axis, and we need to hold on to it. And that's why after we agreed in cabinet, the resolution was passed, I was stunned. I was simply stunned. Because I heard from amongst us that some people are saying that we can pull out. But when was that said? After they had murdered 6 of our hostages in cold blood? What kind of a message does this send to Hamas? What kind of a message does this send? Murder hostages and you'll get concessions in return. I'm saying that it's completely legitimate in discussions. Every minister must voice his or her opinion. Anybody who knows a little bit about these discussions, everybody knows the truth. I encourage everyone to speak their mind. I don't block anyone. I don't prevent anyone from speaking their mind. On the contrary, but once a decision is reached, it's binding. Membership in the cabinet is not as you request program. Once a decision is reached, it's binding for everyone. And the message that we are going to change an essential strategic decision, or that in general that we are changing decisions under the pressure of the murder and massacre of our hostages, it's a terrible mistake. It would serve as an incentive for terrorism and for more murders. So that's why it's not going to happen. It's simply not going to happen. Hamas, of course, they think that it is going to happen as long as they see this rift among us. And by the way, that's not new. They are using this tactics. They've been using it for an entire year now. Please show it now. Let's go back one. First of all, this is what we want to see. The IDF stays here and stops. And in order to get us out, not just of there, but from Gaza in general, they are utilizing a tactics of splitting us up, weakening us, and ultimately leading to our succumbing. How do they do so? This is a document with instructions found in Hamas tunnels by our own soldiers. They found this document. By the way, in the media, they said that it's Sinwar. I cannot promise you that it's Sinwar, but it's Sinwar. But definitely the senior Hamas leaders. This is the original document in Arabic, and this is its translation into Hebrew, to increase the dissemination of images and videos of hostages because of the psychological pressure that creates, to do everything possible in order to increase psychological pressure on Gallant, to continue the line that Netanyahu is responsible for what had happened, to undermine the Israeli narrative as if the ground offensive serves the return of the hostages. Word for word. And that's Hamas's strategy. They want to split us apart. They want to break us down. They are relying on an internal rift. They think that the majority of Israelis will follow this, but they're wrong. I said a while ago, when there was this argument about those who refuse to do reservist duty, I said I thought it was a terrible argument, because it creates an expectation among our enemies that we're weak and rifted and we will give in. And now this creates the same illusion that we will surrender on these crucial events that have an impact on our future, that could risk our future, that can create this rift among us, and that we will surrender. I will not surrender to this pressure. I know how to withstand pressure, even greater pressures, and our people, our nation won't surrender to this pressure. Most of the people understand, and it doesn't matter what you see on the screens, on TV. And I say to Sinwar, forget about it. It's not going to happen. We need to stand united to insist on this vital interest. We must act together so that the other side understands, just like they understood about putting an end to the war. They need to understand that we're not going to give up on the crucial things. We do give in on other matters that aren't that crucial. I gave a lot of flexibility throughout the year, but anything that's crucial, we insist on. And once Hamas understands that, once they understand, there's going to be a deal. And once they understand that, we will ensure our existence and our future. Together we stand, together we fight, and together, God willing, we will win. Now there's some time for questions. Yes, please. Mr. Prime Minister, how do you see the day after? And can we rely on Egypt with respect to the Gaza Strip? President Biden said he's not pleased with your behavior. The day after, well, first of all, it has to be the day after Hamas. So there is nothing that can replace crushing Hamas. In the day after, we must have control over these border crossings for security purposes in the foreseeable future. If the day comes and there's any other one organization that can handle this, when there's a final agreement, then fine. But we must maintain our control over this border that will prevent these smugglings that would lead to more rapes, another massacre, and more killings, another threat from one of the elements of the axis of evil on our mere existence. That's a must. I think there's a major question, and we're now working on it. We're really close to crushing Hamas. We're already crushing them. I said that a few months ago. People didn't believe me. Today, everybody sees it. But we still need to take away any governmental capability from them, and that means we need to find an alternative to all or to a substantial part of the distribution of humanitarian aid, and we're going to achieve that because that's part of the day after. As for what has been attributed to President Biden, I don't know exactly what he said, but I'd like once again to pose the facts. On April 27th, Blinken commented, that's what he said. He referred to an exceptionally extraordinary generous offer made by Israel, given by Israel on May 31st. Just like I just said, Israel agreed to the outline that was supported by and presented by President Biden, and Hamas refused. On August 16, Israel agreed to the final bridging proposal, and Hamas refused. On August 19, Secretary of State Blinken said that Israel had agreed to the American proposal. Now it's up to Hamas to agree to it. And on August 28, the Deputy Director of the CIA said Israel showed seriousness in the negotiations, and now it's Hamas's turn. That was only 5 days ago. What happened during these 5 days? Well, only one thing happened. They murdered 6 of our hostages in cold blood. So after this horrific murder, I don't believe that anyone serious could actually say, now you need to make more concessions. You're not serious. Only Hamas is serious. I don't think that that's possible. I don't think that anybody truly thinks that. And I also don't believe that President Biden really said that. I-24 News. When will the residents of the north of Israel be able to return to their homes? I could give you a schedule for that, the timeline, but I think it would be a mistake. We are in the midst of a fierce struggle against Hezbollah and the Axis. We cannot accept this situation. I had visited Kibbutz Sasa, and in the Northern Command headquarters, I spoke with the commander of the Northern Command, and I spoke with the officers in reserve, some of them who live there. They said, Mr. Prime Minister, we're going to stay here no matter what, but we need to bring back the others, and they're absolutely right. So I said to them, I'm not going to convince anyone to come back. We're also not convincing people along the southern borders. 90% of the people in the south have returned to their homes, not because we convinced them, but merely because we've changed the security situation. And after the targeted killing of Dev and some others, what happened? They would like to, but they just can't, because we've changed reality, because we've taken control over the Gaza Strip, over the Rafah crossing, over the Philadelphia corridor. So it's not about persuasion. We need to change the security reality along the northern border of Israel, and we are changing it. And I said that the very last activity in which we've destroyed thousands of Hezbollah's rockets, and they thought that they could do a surprise attack on Israel, but we issued a preemptive strike, and the rockets, they targeted the Golan Heights and the Galilee, and we've managed to intercept all the drones that were heading towards, that were supposed to go to the Galilee, but that's not the end of story. The end of story will be when we change the security reality there, just as we changed the security reality in the south, and we still need to stand to this test. This can be achieved perhaps diplomatically. I'll be very happy if that would happen. But if it doesn't happen, then it'll happen in a different way. And the plans and the timetables and our preparations, I'm not going to share all these here. Channel 13. Prime Minister Netanyahu, all of the heads of the security establishment, the Chief of General Staff and the head of the Shin Bet said that it is possible to leave the Philadelphia corridor in order to bring to a hostage deal. You chose not to listen to them after that difficult outcome of 6 hostages who were murdered in captivity. Do you understand the magnitude of your mistake, and do you have some personal responsibility over this tragic outcome? I feel profound sorrow. I truly regret the fact that we couldn't bring them. We were so close, but it didn't happen because of this decision. It happened first and foremost because Hamas doesn't want a deal, and we are going to be close to a deal because now we have control over the corridor. Now, regarding their assessment that we could return, there was an assessment of all the security, the entire security establishment, that we could pull out of Gaza and then we'll return with the first rocket, but it didn't happen. And there was another assessment of all the heads of the security security establishment organizations that we could pull out of Lebanon and that we will be able to return with the first rocket. And there was another estimate or assessment of all the heads of the security services that we could bring the PA, the Palestinian Authority, to Oslo, and everything's going to be okay, and it'll yield peace. But that didn't really happen, and that's an understatement. So I'm sorry. I think that we need to see some humility on this subject. The problem isn't the tactical military ability to go there, but rather the diplomatic framework that would exert such a heavy price that you'll never be able to do it. You'll meet a dead end, and I'm not placing myself in a trap that won't bring back hostages, but will also create a huge strategic problems, and the responsibility both for the hostages and for Israeli citizens and our security and the security of future generations. All that responsibility is mine today, but not just mine. It's also the responsibility of the cabinet members, and they've decided that this is a country with a government, and the government has a cabinet, and the key decisions are reached there, and woe on us if that won't be the case. Moshe Steinmetz from Kan 11 News. We've heard this evening that Aryeh Deri criticized you fiercely for bringing up the Philadelphia corridor issue to the cabinet. We've heard your reasons, but he said to bring it to the cabinet and to make it a decision that ties our hands regarding the hostages. What did you answer him? And another question about Philadelphia, please. In May, you agreed to the American proposal that was about the withdrawal of all the forces from the Gaza Strip, and that included the Philadelphia corridor. And in the last proposal, you agreed to diluting the forces in the Philadelphia corridor. How do you explain that? Oh, you have so many questions. You know what? Go ahead. Ask another question. Just another small question about Hamas. You said earlier that they are going to pay a heavy price, Hamas, for the murder of 6 hostages. When the citizens of Israel hear such a statement, it's as if there is no purpose to completely eradicate Hamas in the war, but now they're going to have to pay a heavy price. So could you elaborate on that? We're not going to, I didn't mean that we're not going to eradicate Hamas. What I meant is that they're going to have to pay a heavy price sometime in the near future. We're working on it. I'm not going to tell you what that price is and when we're going to do it. I'd like to leave an element of surprise, just like I said in another opportunity that Hezbollah will pay a heavy price for the murder of those wonderful 12 children, the Druze children in the Golan Heights. And everybody said, okay, you're just talking, but it wasn't just talking. We took action. And here as well, we're going to take action. That's one thing. Of course, that's not in contrast to eradicating Hamas. As for my friend Aryeh Deri, I'm not going to get into the discussion from the cabinet. All the leaks from there are terrible. It's not okay for the censor to allow this. It's not okay. It's not okay that there isn't a polygraph law. We're going to have to find some legislation that will speak against this, because it's an absurd. We're arming Hamas with know-how, internal information. There's nothing like that. I don't know of anything similar to that in any other democracy. I can tell you what I've said. It's the exact opposite. The only way for us to get our hostages back, and that's when Hamas understood that we're not taking our foot from off their throat. Despite their instructions they gave on how to ignite the pressures and set the TV studios in action. But once they understand this, that we're relentless, then they will give in. They won't give in before that. And this is why I think it's the exact opposite. I think that this serves both the release of the hostages and achieving the other goals of the war that I talked about. You asked 2 additional questions. In the outline we're talking about, there's the first stage, that's a 40-day respite, and that's something I'm willing to do. People are saying that I don't want that. It's such a disgrace that people are even saying that. There's no one else more committed to the release of hostages than me. There's nobody who's fighting for the release of hostages, and I was injured when releasing hostages, so nobody can preach to me about that. I think that my option of being adamant and exerting pressure, that's the way to do it, and not weakness and surrendering after they massacred us. Absolutely not. Now, this outline that I've agreed to, we're talking about one first stage of 42 days in which we could resume the fighting if we don't come up with a solution in the negotiations. This is something we insisted on, and if long-term solution is found, if there is a fixed arrangement in the Gaza Strip for somebody else to be in charge of security and protecting the borders, then fine. I don't see that in the horizon at this point, but if something like that does happen, then go ahead. Channel 12, Daphne Liel, thank you very much. And the third question you asked about, you can't say that you're trying to change what I said or to make me say something I didn't say. We're talking about the first stage. The second and third stages, that's still ahead of us. And anyone and everyone can think whatever they want. I wish we could do that. I don't see that happening right now. But so somebody asked if something like that happened. Okay, if something like that happened, when the days of the Messiah will come, we'll see. But you asked about diluting the forces. So why did you agree to dilute the forces? I did not agree to dilute forces. It's very simple. There's a division and a half there right now. And now when you pull out, where did you serve in the IDF? Oh, wow. Well, you can enlist. That's allowed. But I did serve in the military. And I know what it is to maintain such a large force in such a strip. I said what's important is that we are spread from the sea all the way to Kerem Shalom, but we don't need to have a presence there every meter. On the contrary, that could create some problems. We need to be placed in specific points at a certain distance from each other with the ability to patrol the entire axis. And this is what we need in order to protect our forces and also to make sure that nobody crosses over above the ground with the hostages. I'm not talking about underground, even though there's another solution for that as well. I believe in physical presence, not with sensors and not relying on others. And as much respect as I have for sensors or for others, but we have to be there. But we don't have to be there with this huge force. It has to be with sufficient force. Sir, Mr. Prime Minister, despite what you said, hostage families, and it's not only them, they feel that the Israeli ethos has been broken, the ethos that the State of Israel does everything it can to bring hostages back home, and you see the outcome. The father of Danilo said today to tell you that we felt that he did everything he could. We didn't feel that. I don't get to decide, but as a family, we didn't feel that they were doing everything in their power to bring them back home. And they're not doing everything to bring them back home now. And we've heard some serious things from the members of cabinet, very difficult things. If you could comment on that. You talk about unity this evening, but right now we don't even have unity between the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. In view of the tense situation, can you promise that you're not going to fire the Minister of Defense? And there are constant rumors about that, and that doesn't contribute to anything. I am a son of a bereaved family. I'm a member of a bereaved families. So I'm not going to judge any bereaved father or mother or brother, sister, wife, children. I understand their pain. I understand their sorrow. It's inconceivable. It's inconceivable for people who are not part of this family, the family of the bereaved. I am part of that family. So let me tell you something. First of all, we failed. We didn't succeed. But we were close. We were very, very close, not close enough. And we're doing everything we can, and I'm committed to it. I work 24/7. I do sleep a few hours a night. And I am looking for every way, every possibility in order to bring them back home. I insisted in the first deal. How many? How many are we talking about? 140? Even more than that? I insisted on increasing the number of hostages who were alive that will be brought back from 50 to 80. That was in the first deal, and we achieved that. And now I'm insisting on as many living hostages to return as possible. With the mediators, I still haven't seen anything from Hamas. It started from 12, then we went up to 15 and 18, and then we went up to 23, and I want the number to even be higher. I'm fighting over this with everything I can. But of course, I'm not going to criticize the bereaved families who think otherwise, because I've been there. Now, regarding the Minister of Defense, I said that as long as there's trust, we can continue to work. But that requires one thing more than anything else, that all the ministers, without exception, are committed to the decisions of the government and the cabinet. Once these decisions are made, they need to be committed to them. And that's the main thing that's being put to the test right now. Sir, when do you intend to establish a national commission of inquiry? I've already said that at the end of the war, we're going to thoroughly check and find out what exactly happened. Everybody's going to have to answer questions, including myself. There's a lot of disinformation, out there that I received an early warning, but I didn't. Doesn't matter. I'm not getting into this. So much disinformation, so many distortions and lies, and sometimes, it's 180 degrees to what really happened and what is happening inside the cabinet. People hear from the cabinet, from ministers. I just heard that Daphne just asked about it. Where else does anybody hear about anything like that? So the last thing I'd like to see is for our soldiers who are fighting heroically, simply heroically, the IDF soldiers, the people of the Shin Bet, they are doing things that are truly heroic. What we're doing there, it broke all projections and all assumptions. They said you'll never be able to go in, you'll never be able to do it, you'll never be able to enter Khan Yunis or Rafah, and you'll never be able to seize the Philadelphia corridor, and you'll have to pay some terrible prices. And the IDF is doing some heroic work there. And the last thing I'd like it to do that, in the midst of this war that hasn't been completed yet, we still have tasks and assignments, not just and missions, not just there for every soldier and officer to have a lawyer close by. No, I think we should wait for the end of the war, because there is no constraint to do it. I think we must do everything we can in order not to do it right now. And at the end of the war, we'll have to decide how to do it, when to do it. This process is still ahead of us, but that we are going to have it. There is no other option. The senior commanders of the IDF said that they want a deal. Do you think you can force them to continue to fight in the Gaza Strip? And high-ranking security officers, do you think that they should resign because of their briefing against some of the decisions of the cabinet, and also because of October 7th? Well, first of all, I also want a deal, just as any other person in Israel, and perhaps even more than many others. But the decision, what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, that's up to the government. As you know, this is a country with a government. It also has a wonderful army and it has a wonderful security organizations, but it's the government that makes decision, and the IDF and all the other security organizations must follow these decisions. I don't see any other option. I expect people to follow instructions, to follow the government's decisions. That's my expectation, not anything else. Israel Hayom, 10 months into the war, both the military echelon and the Ministry of Defense are saying that you need to shift resources towards combat in the north and the situation in Judea and Samaria. They're saying that the IDF blanket is short, so isn't it the right thing at this point to move on to the challenges that are waiting behind the corner, not even waiting? Why do you think that they need to recommend that to me? It's the exact opposite. You know what? It's not the exact opposite. They need to recommend to me, as if I don't want to take care of the north or to defend Judea and Samaria. I just don't wish to disclose what we're discussing. And it's one of these briefings. I don't want to say who's doing that, but it's completely distorted. It's the exact opposite of the truth. We must stop somehow. This flood needs to be somehow stopped. It gives hope to our enemies. It creates rifts among us. It gives our enemies hope. Enough is enough. I am managing this war not as a one-man show. Of course, the cabinet needs to approve that, but I do so with responsibility. I think I do so in an educated way. I think that the IDF and all the other security organizations, they give us the tools to achieve the goals of this war, and I'm not going to concede any of these goals, not in the north, nor in the south, or in other areas that I'm not going to specify right now. One last question in English.
Good morning. I'm Jean-Philippe Rémy with Le Monde. Mr. Prime Minister, I was wondering, could you define what would help, what would what would signal the end of the war? You've been talking about a total victory that you are expecting, but what would be the factors that would signal this total victory? Would, for example, the elimination of Yahya Sinwar be one of them? What would you define as the factors who would signal the end of the war?
I would define the end of the war in Gaza.
In Gaza.
When Hamas no longer rules Gaza. We throw them out. I would define the end of the war in World War II when the Nazis no longer rule Germany. To do that, you need to have a military victory, and you have to have also the political victory to destroy their governance. We're out to destroy the military capabilities of Hamas and the governing capabilities of Hamas, and we're well on our way to achieving both. That is total victory. But since you asked a question, I wish I could answer in French. Mon français n'est pas suffisant. Suffisant, oui? No, n'est pas suffisant. But I'll say it in English. Since you asked a question in English, I'll answer in English a question that I was asked in Hebrew. I was asked whether I'm not doing enough to the release of hostages. Well, I want to set the record straight. On April 27th, Secretary of State Blinken said that Israel made an extraordinarily generous offer for a hostage deal. On May 31st, Israel agreed to a U.S.-backed proposal. Hamas refused. On August 16th, Israel agreed to what the United States defined as a final bridging proposal. Hamas refused again. On August 19th, Secretary Blinken said, Israel accepted the U.S. proposal. Now Hamas must do the same. On August 28th, that's 5 days ago, Deputy CIA Director said that Israel shows seriousness in the negotiations. Now Hamas must show the same seriousness. I want to ask you something. What has changed in the last 5 days? What has changed? One thing. These murderers executed 6 of our hostages. They shot them in the back of the head. That's what's changed. And now after this, we're asked to show seriousness? We're asked to make concessions? What message does this send Hamas? It says, kill more hostages, murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions. The pressure internationally must be directed at these killers, at Hamas, not at Israel. We say yes, they say no all the time, but they also murdered these people. And now we need maximum pressure on Hamas. I don't believe that either President Biden or anyone serious about achieving peace and achieving the release would seriously ask Israel to make these concessions. We've already made them. Hamas has to make the concession. Thank you very much. Toda rabba lachem.
Thank you very much.
You were listening there to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in what was a rare news conference, speaking to reporters there and also addressing the nation, talking about some of the issues that have come up in the last 24 hours. Joe Biden, the US president, has said that Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing enough when it comes to trying to reach some kind of ceasefire deal with Hamas. In fact, despite the protests that we've seen across this nation in the last 24 hours, in the last few hours in Tel Aviv, our correspondent Alistair Bunkle was saying that tens of thousands of people have arrived in Tel Aviv, in Hostage Square, in other parts of the city to try and demand that the Prime Minister, the cabinet, the government do more to get more hostages out. This comes off the back of 6 hostages who were killed in Gaza, their bodies retrieved, 2 of the funerals in the last 24 hours. One of the hostages, Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg. Poland's funeral was this afternoon. His mother spoke in a very moving way about her 23-year-old son. They spoke at the DNC just a few weeks ago at the Democratic National Convention and about the fact that they were lobbying to get their son back, to get all of the hostages back. But you were listening there to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who asked for forgiveness for not bringing those hostages back alive, but also doubled down on Hamas. That last question there from the French journalist who asked what it would take to end this war, and you heard there from the Prime Minister, he said when Hamas is no longer ruling Gaza. So this idea that we have continued to hear over the last few months that there is a ceasefire deal that is coming close, being negotiated by Egypt, Qatar and the United States between the two sides, that it was close to reaching some kind of agreement. Just in the last 24 hours, we've heard leaders from those countries say it's a take it or leave it situation now, that they want pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister to agree to a hostage deal, to a ceasefire deal, to get those hostages, remaining hostages, roughly about 97 of them, out of Gaza. But what you heard there from the Israeli Prime Minister was him doubling down on Hamas, saying that they're not going to give up the Philadelphi corridor, the crossing between Gaza and Egypt. The Egyptians have said that they don't want the Israelis there. It is part of the negotiations that Hamas has asked for Israel to exit the Philadelphi corridor. It was hugely debated last week in cabinet. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, debated Benjamin Netanyahu and said that if we remain in the Philadelphia corridor, there will be more hostages who end up dead. And what we heard there from the Prime Minister is him not budging, despite the protest, despite the general strike that halted businesses, transportation. The airport was on strike for half of the day, and as well as hospitals and schools for half of the day as well. There are protests currently in Tel Aviv, and Ali Bunkle was telling us that it has gained momentum. So there's a lot of anger and grief across this nation towards the Prime Minister. Of course, it's a given that people are angry and outraged and disgusted by what happened on October the 7th and the several hundred hostages that have been taken. We understand, as I said, 97 remain alive, and we saw the fate of those hostages killed in the tunnel at the weekend. So these protesters are now demanding that these hostages be returned. One of the questions was that was asked of Benjamin Netanyahu was, does he take responsibility for the fact that these hostages were not returned alive? He denied that. He said, I sleep very little. There is no one who is working harder than me to try and get those hostages back. But it is a military execution that they are trying to achieve. He said there needs to be a political deal as well, but he talked about the importance of doing this militarily, which is exactly what those protesters are now asking to be stopped. They're saying that the military should not be going in to get these hostages back, that it should be a political deal, a ceasefire deal that has been negotiated and discussed with the United States, with Egypt, with Qatar over the course of the last few months. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that he will not stop this war until Hamas is eradicated. Where that leaves this ceasefire deal, where that leaves the pressure coming from the United States, Kamala Harris, the Vice President and the Democratic presidential nominee, just this afternoon tweeted that it is enough now. Time has come for a deal to be reached, that there needs to be an end to the suffering on both sides. You're watching the Politics Hub. Back to you now in the studio, Sophie.
Yalda, thank you. As Yalda was saying, we're breaking into, of course, the Politics Hub to bring you that news conference with the Israeli Prime Minister. Yalda, while I've got you, it's one of these days here in the UK where you just realise what a huge issue foreign affairs is for any UK Prime Minister, because the big news here today, the decision announced by David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, that the UK is going to begin to suspend some weapons exports to Israel because of what they describe as a risk that they could be used to break international law. How's that gone down?
Well, not well, Sophie. The Israeli foreign minister responded to that and said that they were disappointed. The Israeli government is disappointed by this move. He said it sends the wrong message to not just Hamas, but of course to Iran. Iran has vowed and promised to launch an attack, a strike on Israel following the death of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. He was killed just a few weeks ago in Iran while he was there on a visit. And so Iran has vowed to continue their war against Israel. We saw an attack launched on Israel in April following Israel's attack on some senior military commanders in a compound in Syria. So things have been tense between Iran and Israel. That continues as part of a backdrop here. But the focus really of the Foreign Secretary's remarks today was suspending and stopping the arms sales of some 30 out of 350 arms sales to Israel. While it isn't a huge amount, and David Lammy has talked about that in the past, the fact that these arms are being sold to Israel, there is disappointment here. But it is significant on a day where there's mounting pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister, even though, Sophie, you heard there him doubling down. The fact that there is growing international pressure, Joe Biden saying that he's not doing enough, David Lammy announcing this arms sales being stopped, while it's a small number, it is significant that it is happening at a time where there's Israeli pressure, international pressure on the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yalda, thank you very much. Yalda Hakim there reporting for us from Jerusalem.